Hello, everyone. Happy Memorial Day. My name is Abby, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the young adult assistant at the Twin Lakes Library System. So today I wanted to do a little video for book recommendations and just discuss three books. So if you didn't know, May is also Mental Health Awareness Month. So I previously did a video about Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and I talked about some books related with that. But Mental Health Awareness Month is also May. So I wanted to do some books that I thought did really good jobs at creating conversations about mental health. And so here you go. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. And on Hoopla, we offer it in ebook format, and it's recommended by Common Sense Media for ages 13 and up. I did want to say there are some trigger warnings for abuse and depictions of depression and anxiety. So just know that going into it. If that makes you comfortable or you think you can handle that, just know that. So the book follows a girl named Frances, and this book is set in the UK, so the school system there's a little different than America, but basically what she's doing is she's preparing all these tests and revisions for trying to get into college, and I believe she's trying to get into Cambridge, and that's always been her plan. She's always tried to excel academically because of that, because that's just what she's always thought she has to do and what the expectation has been for her whole life. So she faces a lot of academic pressure to succeed. So that's kind of, it makes her feel very anxious when it comes to school and stuff. And she does all of that, but then she also, it's something that's kind of like fun and on the side, is she listens to this podcast called Universe City. And Universe City is this podcast. Nobody knows who the creator of the podcast is. It's kind of science fiction, fantasy. And it's just something that Frances gets a lot of joy out of, and she does, I believe, artwork for it, and she posts it, and it ends up getting noticed by the creator, who contacts her and asks if she can do some fan art for it, which is a big deal because that makes her really excited. She loves doing artwork. And so she ends up meeting the creator, who is this boy named Aled. And Aled is actually the brother of a girl that Frances previously had a crush on before she disappeared one day. And so she kind of knows who Aled is, but she's not super close with him before this. And he's very shy, and he kind of sticks to himself because his mother is very controlling and horrible. She meets him, and they start working on Universe City together, and they become really close friends, and they start to learn a lot more about each other, and Aled sort of starts to break out of his shell a little bit with Frances because he's pretty shy and keeps to himself because of just the way his mother is. But Frances and him develop a really healthy relationship and friendship. But then something happens, and it causes Frances and Aled to have some tension in their relationship, and Frances has to try to sort of figure out how to fix it and repair that relationship, and then, make up with Aled. And then the whole, the real thing that goes behind the rest of, what happens in the book plot-wise, the real thing I think that Oseman is trying to convey to the readers are kind of both Aled and Frances have to decide whether or not they want to do what's been expected of them in society, and what they're predominantly what Aled's mom, but what their families want for them in the future, and do they actually want to go to college? Is that actually the path for them? Is there something different? So yeah. So the reason why I love this book, first off, I love every Alice Oseman book. I think she's an incredible writer. I've read everything she's written except maybe a couple updates behind on a webcomic that she posts. All of her books and graphic novels are phenomenal, and she's coming out with a new one, so I'm very excited. So I think Alice Oseman is just a fantastic writer in general. This is actually the first book I ever read by her, and her writing is just very beautiful, and her characters feel very, very real, and I really appreciate that about her work. So I think in general, you should just read Alice Oseman because she's wonderful. And there's another book we have on Hoopla called Solitaire. I think that was her first book that she ever wrote. That also is a really good book about mental health that you could read if you were if you liked this and you wanted more of her. So yeah, the next season, the representation in this book is phenomenal. I think pretty much all of the main characters are somewhere on the LGBTQI plus spectrum, which I think is incredible. And that's something she holds steady through all of her works. So I really love seeing that in books. She has good conversations about gender and race and class, and she does all of that in a very approachable way for readers, which is awesome to see in YA fiction. In case you hadn't noticed a theme in all of my little book recommendations, I really like when authors talk about important subject matter in their works, because I just think that we gotta start those conversations young. She also talks about really real problems that every kid at some point in their life has to go through, predominantly about academic pressures, whether or not college is right for them, kind of finding out who you are and what you want to do for the rest of your life. There's a lot of pressure that goes into that, and Oseman kind of talks about how that's not super easy, and it sometimes feels like it's made to seem a lot easier than it is, and that's she showcases that it's not through her characters, and I really loved seeing that. I really loved Alad's podcast, like the little snippets that were kind of explained to the reader, I think are really cool, and I wish it was real, and I would have loved to read it or listen to it. It makes you really think. I think that's I love books that make me think, so I like that this is a book that makes you think. I think Alad and Frances' friendship is fantastic. I really liked that. This is kind of a spoiler, but just so you know, they don't get together in any romantic way. They just stay friends the whole book, and I really liked that. It's nice to see that in books and not see a book so heavily focused on romance. I really appreciated seeing that in this book. And some of the side characters I think are some of the best side characters that I've ever read in fiction. You've got Frances's mom, who is super awesome and supportive of Frances. And then Daniel, who is a fellow student at Frances' school, and he's also connected to Alad, but I'm not going to talk about it because that would be a spoiler, so just know that. I also think that this book has really good conversations about fan culture. So I know Dabney last week in their Slice of Life video, they sort of talked about fan fiction and fandom culture, and that's something that's very prominent on the internet, and this book sort of addresses that, and it has conversations about that, and good fan culture versus not so good fan culture, and I liked seeing that because it is a really real thing, and I think more recently a lot of books have sort of started talking about that and why, but I haven't seen a lot yet, so I'm excited for that to continue being showcased in YA books, but I really liked Alice's way of doing it in this book. So yeah, I definitely highly recommend that. I highly recommend any Alice Oseman's book. I think Radio Silence, Solitaire is her other book that's on here. She has another book called Born for This that does a really good conversation about anxiety rep, and I think I love that book. That's my favorite Alice Oseman book, but it's sadly not on Hoopla, but we do have it in our branch, so when you can start checking out physical books again at some point, I highly recommend you check that book out. Okay, so the next book I am going to recommend is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia, and this is also in ebook format on Hoopla, and it's recommended for ages 13 and up. And there is trigger warnings again for kind of anxiety and depression, and also there's conversations about suicide, so just know that going in. So this book is about an 18-year-old girl named Eliza, and she is the secret creator of an extremely popular webcomic called Monstrous Sea. And she's secret creator because she has really intense anxiety, and she doesn't want people to know that she's behind it because fame kind of scares her a little bit. So she keeps that to herself. And in the real world, she does not have friends. She's not super popular. She feels kind of disconnected from her family. So she really leans into the webcomic in the internet world, and she much prefers it to the real world. and she doesn't want to lose that through like becoming famous, I believe, so she kind of keeps that a secret. So like I was saying, she's very into the internet world and the fandom community online and online friendships, and that's really important to her because she doesn't really have that outlet in real life. But then she meets a transfer student named Wallace who practiced selective mutism, which is kind of its own conversation about mental health. But that's really done really well. I've read a couple books with selective mutism in it, and I really liked how Zappia handled it in her book. But he happens to also be the biggest fan fiction writer for Eliza's webcomic, and they meet, and Eliza and him become friends, and they develop a relationship, and she's kind of toys with the idea of whether or not she should really tell him that she is the creator of Monstrous Sea and what that would mean for their relationship and her. So kind of just follows that. And then, you know, something else happens in the book that I'm not going to spoil. And she sort of has to deal with the aftermath of what happens. So why I loved it. First off, I really liked that Zappia included kind of segments from Monstrous Sea in the book. I really like when authors kind of make books more interactive, and all the books that I am going to talk about today sort of have some sort of element like that included. So I really appreciated that. I wish it was a real webcomic. I hope one day she writes Monstrous Sea, please. I think that Zappia also does a really good job at doing an accurate portrayal of anxiety. It didn't romanticize it. It was incredibly realistic. You never felt like it was like trying too hard. Like it felt really real and really understanding of what it is to have that to kind of suffer that. The characters are all incredibly lovable. I really love Eliza. I really love Wallace. I think they're both fun and interesting, and I liked watching them grow through their journey and watching their relationship grow, and I enjoyed their interactions a lot. Like Osman, Zappia sort of discusses fan culture, and she does it in a really honest way with the good stuff and the bad stuff, so like internet fame and internet fan culture and what's good about it and sometimes what's kind of harmful about it. So yeah, I like that a lot. And it has a strong emphasis on the importance of friendship, and I have also talked about multiple times how relationships in books are really important to me. Good relationships in books are really important to me, and I think Eliza and Wallace have both a really good relationship with each other, and I liked watching how that relationship came to be. I personally read this at a time where I was feeling a lot of things that Eliza was feeling in the book, so it felt really good, and I connected really well to this book, and it felt really personal. So I hope that other people can have a similar reading experience with it. I read it at a time where I really needed to read it. So I think that it's a book that everyone should read at some point in their life, but, you know, whenever that time is for you. And so the last book that I'm going to be recommending is Challenger Deep by Neal Shusterman, and this is also an ebook format, and it is for ages 14 and up. This is going to include trigger warnings for a suicide attempt, and it also discusses schizophrenia and institutionalization, so just know that going in. So this book follows a 15-year-old boy named Caden Bosch who suffers from schizophrenia, and the book is formatted where it's Caden's life and reality, and then there's Caden's delusions. So just know that it's a little disorienting the first time you read the book, or like when you're first getting into the book, but I promise it's really important that it's formatted that way, and there's a reason it's formatted that way. So if you do end up reading this and it's confusing and you're like, I don't know if I want to keep reading this, I promise you it really matters that it's formatted this way. So he starts, Caden's kind of just like, he comes from a normal family, like nothing's really out of the ordinary for him. He's a really good high school student. He's athletic, he's well liked, like has a great life. And then he starts sort of having these delusions of himself on a ship, where he's traveling to the deepest part of the earth, which is known as the Challenger Deep, which explains the title of the book. And he's sort of torn between listening to this pirate captain or committing mutiny with this pirate captain's parrot. And so as he's sort of in these delusions, he's also sort of starting to lose grip on like what it is that is reality, and he's sort of starting to lose sight of everything because of these delusions that are kind of induced by his schizophrenia. And in the summary of the book that is on like the back of the book, it says he is torn. So basically Caden's like, he's sort of torn between what is real and what is not real, and you sort of follow him as he copes with dealing with schizophrenia and his family trying to deal with his schizophrenia. And I think this is a book that's like better, I don't say a ton about it because the summary itself is pretty brief on the back of the book, so I think it's better that I don't say a ton about it. So if you do decide to read it, you know, get to experience it all. So why I loved this book, just for reference, this book also won the National Book Award, which is a really big deal, so know that it is well liked pretty universally, but it's incredibly respectful and well researched. Sometimes authors and media will portray mental illness in not a fantastic light, or that is kind of disrespectful to the people who cope with it. Schizophrenia being one that seems to suffer from that predominantly in its presentation, that it's not always given a very kind portrayal, and people who suffer it are not always given a very kind portrayal. But Chesterman does a really good job, and it's really well researched, and he's not disrespectful in his presentation of the illness. He's very realistic about it, but he doesn't try to make it seem worse or kind of romanticize it. Like, he makes it very real. And Chesterman also worked on this book with his son, who a lot of Caden's experiences are based off of, because his son also suffered from mental illness. So you can tell that it was really important to him that he got all of this right. So he makes, you can see it's very well researched, it's very respectful, it's never cruel or unnecessary to Caden, so I really liked that. I liked that he put in the work to make sure that this was a good representation of schizophrenia. Caden's not a shallow character. He's never just reduced to his illness. He's three-dimensional. He has likes, he has interests. He just also happens to be suffering from schizophrenia, and at a point where it's a little intense for him in terms of dealing with it. So I really liked Caden's characterization, and I enjoyed, maybe not the right word, I was pleased by his presentation, and that he was never just his illness, and that he was more than that. So like I said earlier, the format's a little disorienting, but the format is actually really important and really interesting, because it's sort of, like I said, reality and then delusion, and then those start to really intermix with each other, and they kind of start to explain each other, which seems confusing, but again, if you read it, you'll understand what I'm saying. But they become really important to understanding both aspects of Caden's life. There's also artwork in the book that's done by Chesterman's son, and it's kind of like highlights what people who maybe suffer from a mental illness like this will see, and it kind of lets the reader better understand. If you don't have it, you're never going to fully understand what it is to have schizophrenia or some sort of mental illness that is similar to it, but Chesterman just opens this door a little bit just so you can sort of grasp what happens to these people and like what they're seeing, and better understand what it is they're coping with and dealing with. There are very realistic portrayals of treating and coping with mental illness, whether that be the person who is actually experiencing the mental illness or whether it is the people who in their lives. I think that, again, sometimes media and other books will not do this in a very positive light, but Chesterman does it in a very real, and I think that makes it a positive light, because he doesn't embellish it, he doesn't undermine it, he makes it very real, and which makes it a very powerful novel. And that just, I think, goes back into the fact that he well researched it, and he also is basing it off of his own personal experiences when he was writing this. So yeah, those are my 3 book recommendations for Mental Health Awareness Month. There should be a list at some point that comes out talking about other books that you can find on Hoopla for it. But I really recommend reading these 3. These are my 3 favorites personally. But I definitely think you should try to explore as much as you can in terms of books that are about mental health and mental illness. And definitely also make sure you do a little bit of research on those books and make sure they are good portrayals of mental illness and mental health, whether that mean more realistic or it doesn't romanticize, because that's really important when you're reading. So yeah, thank you and have a good day. Bye.